Hi, everyone. It's Elizabeth Hamblet. I hope you are out there joining us for this very special Q&A. I have two admissions experts here ready to take your questions. So I have Brennan Barnard and Rick Clark, who are co-authors of my very marked up copy. I'm not usually very good at this, but The Truth About College Admission. Let me see. There you go. See all those tabs? This is a wonderful book. It's exactly what your families need to get through this process, all very happy, help your student find the right answer to the college that's going to be a good fit for them. And as the book cover says, getting in and staying together. So thank you so much for joining me. Brennan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who aren't familiar with you and how you got into this work?
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully all those tabs are not edits you noticed as you went through the book.
No, they are just pearls of wisdom.
Yeah. Well, so my background is I am the director of college counseling at Con Lab High School in Mountain View, California, and also, which is, as you'll see behind me, is not where I am right now. I'm also the dean of college counseling and outreach at the Dairyfield School in New Hampshire. And I also serve as the college admission program advisor for Making Caring Common at the Harvard Grad School of Education. So that's just a little bit of my background. And I've done admission and worked in a number of different schools in college counseling and admission.
And Rick, for those who don't know you, and I can't imagine nobody does, but just in case.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for having us and looking forward to the conversation. Rick Clark, I'm the director of undergrad admission at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, where I have been for a while now. But in addition to my time at Georgia Tech, have also been on the private side at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, Georgia State University here in Atlanta, and then also on the secondary side a little bit at the Macaulay School in Tennessee. So thanks again for the opportunity. And yeah, we're excited to be with you.
How did you two join together and decide to write this book?
You want to take that one, Rick?
Sure. Yeah, so Brennan and I both go to a annual gathering that's up in Rhode Island. It's each summer. And unfortunately, that's been a little truncated in recent years, but prior to. And, you know, it was interesting because it brings together both the college and the high school side. And we, had some time there to just, go for some walks, talk a little bit. And I think that kind of sparked our friendship. And then later that same year, we were in Boston at a national conference. I went on another walk and we're talking a little bit about, our writing. I follow Brennan's writing on Forbes, and he had been reading a little of what I've been putting out from Georgia Tech in our blog, and really just kind of realized like we have a very similar message. Both of us had explored the idea of a book, and we just knew it would be much stronger together to be able to give the perspective from both sides, quote unquote, both sides of the desk. What are families really grappling with, and what's confusing to them and anxiety driving on the high school side? And then what's really happening on the college side as far as what's going into making those decisions and some of the pressures we're under, and just how admission committees do or don't really work to kind of dispel some of those misconceptions that people have.
Well, that's what I love about both your individual work and the work you've done together. I think, this whole process is driven in a lot of ways by fear and anxiety. And I think you both, individually and together do so much to try to help families just feel a little bit more relaxed about it. I imagine it was really hard to decide what to leave out of a book like this. There's so much in it. But is there anything that you wish you had, space for, page count for that maybe didn't get in there?
Yeah, I mean, we had to really early on kind of decide, like, kind of accept the fact that we can't be everything to everyone, and kind of aim down the middle as much as possible and try to catch as many people as possible. I think looking back, we both wish we had more space to kind of dig into the financial part of the college admission experience and have a whole chapter potentially on that and really dig in for families, because we do talk about it as kind of a wedge that can be driven, if not talked about, can be driven in between a family. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about kind of financial issues.
Yeah, that seems right. Let me just look. I don't see any questions from our audience yet. If you are watching us live, please put the questions in the chat and we will deliver them to these experts. So let's just get started. And for those who aren't familiar with me, I'm a learning disabilities specialist and I do a lot of writing and talking about preparing students with disabilities for successful college transition. And so part of how I came to this little event is Rick was nice enough to talk to me for my next book. And I brought to him the questions that I find families are often asking me about the admissions process for students with disabilities. So to start with, when you think about the events that students are attending, sometimes virtually now, sometimes in person, what kinds of things do you think students should be looking for if they have disabilities?
I can start with that. And I mean, obviously Brennan's, working on the ground with students, but just thinking about, as we're talking to our tour guides, as we're talking to our admission counselors about delivering information and hosting people on campus, I can talk a little bit about it from that side. I mean, the biggest thing that we encourage our admission folks to say repeatedly and give space and opportunity for is for people to ask their individual questions. And our tour guides, same thing. I mean, yeah, we're going to run our normal route and we're going to make sure we hit on our normal kind of what we feel like are important need to knows about, in this case, Georgia Tech, but the same thing at any school, right? But what we really do try to encourage them to say is, what have you not seen that you need to see? Who have you not been able to meet that you would like to be able to meet? How can I connect you? Because we acknowledge, like, we're generalists, right? Admission is the hub of the wheel in many ways. And our job is to listen for what matters to people and make sure they find that resource. And so whether it be a student who's just passionate about biology or French, or somebody who has some concerns about, learning disabilities they may have and the support that's going to be there, that is, fundamentally why we're there, is to answer the questions or connect them if we don't have them. Mm-hmm. And I think that, back to your word of fear, and something that we do try to just acknowledge that everybody understandably has as humans, right, around college admission oftentimes, because it is emotional and sometimes it is also mysterious, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's okay that people do feel a little bit of anxiety or fear or whatever the word might be. But one thing that people, especially students, I think, who sometimes have learning differences or disabilities, are disproportionately concerned about is that that's going to somehow be used in a judging way or used in a punitive way. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is that we're not sitting there making notes about those questions. Our whole function, our whole job is to be a connector. And so if someone's listening who might be about to go out into that sort of stage of their admission experience where they're really exploring, which of course the spring is a popular time for that, and the summer definitely is too, that would be my biggest thing, is to let go of some of those concerns or those fears and to embrace, like, hey, I spent money to be here. I took time to be here. And this is potentially a future community for me. It is my job, like my responsibility, to get my questions answered while I'm here. And that's why these folks are taking their time to host me.
Yeah, I would just add, we talk a lot about, no matter who the student is or what their interests or what their strengths are, it's so important to know yourself before you start going and looking at schools. We talk about this a lot in the book, that, it's really important for students and for families to know what kind of levels of support they might need if they need learning support, and to know themselves and kind of match what they're looking for and their kind of mission to the school's mission. And so being able to go in really well equipped to ask the right questions, to not accept kind of easy answers, right? To keep questioning and not leave until you have the questions you want answered. I think that's really important, because sometimes it does feel like a kind of intimidating process, and you feel, and I think some students feel kind of in a passive role when they go to schools. And so to be more active and to seek out the information they need.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, and Rick, you said something that I wanted to circle back to. I think, you said, and you said this to me when I talked to you, that you folks will do your best to answer questions, but then also refer students back, to the right offices for those questions. I mean, Brennan, when you are advising students, do you tell them to, not just ask the admissions folks, but also, talk to the disability services offices directly?
Yeah, absolutely. And to stop by those offices, see what's available. Not worry about there's no communication. I think sometimes families worry if I go talk to the learning support office or the ADA person on campus, like they're gonna tell admission I was there.
Yeah.
Like Rick said, it does seem kind of mysterious, and there's no communication in that way, and so. They should absolutely seek out those offices, ask the questions, and those folks. In my experience with families, those folks are super encouraging and willing to answer all the questions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing just before we leave that is maybe we're not leaving it, but I just want to pin for a second is admission people, and I'm not say guilty of it. It's fine, but we say a lot, fit and match. You hear these words constantly, right? Fit and match. Find your fit, find your match. I mean, that is fundamentally a two-way street, right? I mean, it goes both ways. And so a student, especially when they're on the campus or on a virtual program, is it a match? I mean, you can only know that if you're really asking the questions that matter to you. And if you're going to be part of a community where you are embraced and supported and can thrive, that needs to happen. That needs to happen.
Yeah, I would just add that, and then we'll let you talk. I think we're going off here. I think it's a lot of students with whom I work are worried that if the school has kind of a specific learning support program, like a special program for students with learning issues, that they will somehow be singled out and be separate from the other students on campus. And I also get this with students who are interested in honors colleges and things like that. They're worried that they'll somehow kind of a scarlet letter type thing, right? Where they'll be identified as kind of being different. And so I think those are good kind of questions to ask.
So I want to just circle back to something that Brennan said, because I think it's something, there's sort of a logical progression of thought. So, we were talking about this fear and anxiety of, if you ask the tour guide where the, disability services office is, that student's going to go back to Rick's office and say, hey, Elizabeth was on my tour. And again, but all of this presumes that the college knowing that a student has a disability would be bad for the student.
Right.
And so I see a question right here, Rick and Brennan. So this is a perfect kind of follow-up to this. My daughter was told not to share her disability in her applications because it would be seen as a ploy for sympathy. I disagree, as I see her academic success, in spite of her challenges, as an indicator of her resilience and fortitude. What are your thoughts? Should she call admissions offices at this point and let them know about her disability to add to her file? That's a great question. I mean, I just assume students, if they want to, are going to do it in their file. So I'm not sure. Maybe this student's already submitted, I guess, right?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we get this question all the time, right? I get support at my school. I have a learning disability. Should I report it? And it's they don't have to, but I think if it gives context to everything else that's going on for them, it's important to share, right? So sometimes students don't, they'll go from kindergarten through 9th, 10th grade, whatever, and maybe 12th grade and not be diagnosed, and they'll have struggled academically, and then all of a sudden they get a diagnosis and things are kind of turning around. And so if it adds color, it adds context to their record, maybe because of their learning difference, they have not been able to do as much extracurricularly and things like that. And so how does this help contextualize the application? And if it doesn't, if there's nothing, and the student doesn't want to indicate it, then that's their prerogative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to put that a different way, but also to talk about it really broadly, theoretically, and I mean, there's lots of imperfections with applications, right, in the structure of applications. And this is being debated constantly about what's the next sort of iteration or evolution of the application itself, right? How should students be able to, these are my words, but tell their story? I mean, that is the whole idea of an application, is you could put your full story out there. And you do that by telling us where you're from, where you go to high school, telling us a little bit about your family, telling us a little bit about the stuff you've been doing outside the classroom, getting an opportunity to write, sending us your transcripts. I mean, this is all part of your story. And one thing I know Brennan and I both have said and continue to tell students, regularly, is if it is fundamentally a part of your story, right? And this is, I think, as you was just mentioning, I mean, we're all about understanding context, families context, community context, school context, obviously during the pandemic, like impact of what's happening around you. And often students will get someone to edit their essay because they're so paranoid about an essay, but they don't get somebody to look back over their whole application and say, what's missing? Like, what,
That's so interesting.
It is, I mean, that is one of the biggest pieces of advice I have for students is before you turn in an application, don't just ask somebody to read your essay, ask them to look over the whole thing and say, hold on a second, like, this is a big part. I think this is a big part of who you are. Like, do you not want to include that? And sometimes that's the extracurricular stuff. But in this case, it very well could be on the disability. Hey, this is fundamentally a big part of who I am, how I learn, how I contribute or impact and influence people around me. It needs to be part of it. Or as Brandon said, maybe it is just kind of a small part and not like a big part of who I fundamentally see myself as. I mean, I think that's a good filter to at least start with and have a conversation around.
But it won't be seen as sympathy. I mean, I think that's
right.
Well, I would imagine it also depends on how the student writes about it, right? I mean, if it's written in a way to, I guess, elicit sympathy, then that might be a trouble. A source of trouble. And I do, as Rick said, I do want to go back and sort of pin this point too, because I want to make sure it's clear to people who are listening. So again, when we talk about disclosure in the admissions process, what I hear in people's fear is if the college knows my student has a disability, that is going to put them at a disadvantage. So let me just allow you each to say something sort of very, specific about how your response to that.
Well, I'll just say it's illegal, right?
Right.
There you go. I mean, I don't think it would. Rick is better to speak about that coming from his perspective.
Well, I mean, we're in the middle of admission committee right now. I mean, we are in the heat of our cycle. So we're reading applications every day. We're in committee every week. And it's one thing that we talk a lot about as we frame why are we doing this is our job is to enroll students who can be academically successful and can contribute to the community around them, fundamentally making people better as they do that, right? So, I mean, that's what we're doing. And that takes, ideally, that takes a very broad cross-section of applicants, and not just because they have the highest test score or the best GPA or the fanciest classes, but because there's parts of their background that's going to enrich that community. And that's it. And so often, I mean, I would say daily right now when we're reading 50 applications a day, daily you see students who have some type of learning disability. Some of them are admitted, some of them are not. But that's not because of the disability. That's because of those other things I just mentioned. Can they be academically successful? Are they going to enrich the community around them? And are they going to make people around them better as they do that?
So just for those who are joining us, I'm talking to Brennan Barnard and Rick Clark. I'm going to try this again. I'm not winning any awards for video direction, but this is their book, Truth About College Admission. This is my copy. And they recently came out this fall with a workbook. And before I forget, we did have a question about what made you decide to do a workbook after the effort it takes to write a book.
Yeah, we as the book came out, we heard back from a lot of folks, from counselors and other folks saying, we would really love kind of practical exercises, things how do we put this kind of your ideas and your approach to this into practice? And so we kind of mirrored the book chapter to chapter, and provided some real kind of like hands-on kind of curriculum basically for the college search.
Yeah, I mean, and in the book you have, as you read, Elizabeth, I mean, at the end of every chapter, we had some questions, try this, a little bit of practical, some questions to consider, some conversation starters. And what we heard from oftentimes families and counselors was, man, we love that and haven't really seen that in other places. Like, can you build that out? So as Brennan said.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk to you about the funnel, because that was really eye-opening to me. And I think it sort of coalesces with this question: are disabled students seen as part of the diverse community? And if so, and this is very specific, what percentage of your student body is disabled? So what, of course, I've got a bunch of questions.
I think those are questions that somebody might ask on a college tour. I think maybe that's what maybe it was a comment when we were talking about.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Yeah. I mean, Rick, do you know what the percentage of Georgia Tech student body has a disability?
I have no idea. Okay. I know that it's a great question. I mean, the easier thing probably for us to get our hands on would be talking to the people in ADAPS, which is our disability services group, and asking them sort of, how many, right, exactly, what's their client list, and how has that looked or changed maybe over time. But no, and I would say, actually, I'm kind of glad I don't know that percentage or number, just because it sort of illustrates the point. Like, it's not what we're doing. We don't have a quota or a maximum. We're admitting students all the time who have these type of challenges and disabilities. I mean, in fact, this is a whole different level, I think, but right now, we just named finalists for our like premier merit scholarship. And there's a young lady who's blind, who's a finalist for that. And just so impressive, and so excited to see her kind of move through the process of interviewing and possibly coming to Georgia Tech.
I think a good question though is also for the sport office, like how much traffic they get, right? Not just how big their list is, but how active are students using their services, and same with mental health too, right? The counseling center, like how comfortable do students feel kind of accessing the support that's there on campus?
I think that's an excellent point. And I just want to say, I've put in the chat a post that I wrote for my blog. Part of what I'm doing is trying to also bust myths that I hear reflected to me by families. And one of the things that I think families need to be aware of is any statistics about students who are enrolled at college who have a disability, as Rick said, comes out of the Disability Services Office. And all that can count is the number of students with disabilities who actually identify themselves to the Disability Services Office. And so what I try to remind people of when they hear, rumors like, this parent seems to have that, saying that you have a disability will be seen as a ploy for sympathy or whatever they want to say, there's no data behind any of this. So the National Center for Educational Statistics, I think the most recent information they have is the 2015-2016 academic year. And it showed that 11% of undergraduates enrolled in college in the country at that time identified as having a disability. Presumably those stats came from the disability services offices, but they're not coming from the admissions office. And what people need to understand is, even if Rick's office wanted to count the number of students that they admitted and rejected each year that had a disability, all they'd be able to count would be the number of students who actually identified themselves in their application. But research shows that there are a number of students who do not do that. And actually don't even ask for accommodations when they get to college. And you can read my book that comes out this summer if you want to learn more about that. but those numbers, even if they had them, would only reflect the students who actually disclosed. For those who are new to the application process, be aware that students do not have to say anything about their disability. As Brennan said, it's illegal for colleges to ask them any questions. That said, they are, and Rick has, and his colleagues that I interviewed for the book, encourage students to disclose their disability when they apply, but they don't have to. And so there are no admissions numbers available publicly anywhere. And I doubt colleges are collecting them about how many students are accepted or rejected each year who have a disability.
Right. And then there's even another level, right, of those who disclose to the Learning Support Office or Disability Office, like how many of them are actually using those accommodations.
That's a whole other statistical set. Absolutely.
Sure.
All right. We have a question. Somebody says, my son has mutism. He cannot speak in front of people. Is there a chance of getting into college?
So the short answer is yes. I'd say absolutely. I mean, again, this is, in my opinion, the beauty of American higher education. College is a big word. You know, in our country, college is a big word, and it takes on all kinds of shapes and sizes. And, you know, in addition to kind of my time at Georgia Tech, I also work for the State Department and have the opportunity to talk with Americans who are in consulates and embassies around the world. And, you know, what it's really kind of brought home to me is just how different American higher education is than pretty much anywhere else in the world. And I mean, I think honestly, as Americans, like, we probably aren't proud enough of our higher education system. And that's the beauty of it, is that this idea of fit and match, and then students who have great academic talent, but different personalities and different needs can 100% find a place that's going to be thrilled to have them, not only to admit them, but really going to be a great fit. And so my answer to that is yes. Brennan, I don't know if you might sort of expound a bit on where you would direct somebody to look, or maybe Elizabeth, you would have some tips on, you know, how to kind of start that process. But just from a college admissions standpoint, what are we here for? Why do we exist? What are we trying to accomplish? 100% yes.
I thought maybe you were going to bust out with a rendition of the Star Spangled Banner or something like that. I would say start with the folks who support you already, and ask them about kind of what resources they have. And then also, I would choose a college, maybe in your community or something like that, and talk to the Disability Support Office at that college, not specifically about their college, but they have networks of colleagues at other schools. And oftentimes, I mean, it's the same thing with admissions, right? I mean, or financial aid. Just because you're not applying to that college doesn't mean those supports and those counselors aren't there to help you through the search. So I would reach out to somebody at some office at some school and ask them what they know.
Yeah, I mean, and for this parent, I think, you know, getting in is different than being at college. So certainly, right, Rick, if somebody meets the requirements for a college, they'll be admitted. And our community college generally, or colleges, across the country are typically what's called open enrollment, which means as long as you have a GED or a high school diploma, I think, you can be a community college student. So, you know, the impact of your students' mutism on their ability to, you know, get through their classes once they are in college is a different question. And so, you know, look at the accommodations they're receiving at the high school level right now, and start to talk to disability services offices, you know, at your nearby colleges, as Rick said, or if there's a college that interests your student. And, you know, this may not be the first student with mutism that they've ever served. And so I can't tell you what those possibilities look like, but, you know, there are lots of people out there who could. Okay, let's see. What is the hardest part of the admissions process for both of you? That's a good one.
I can go first. I think back to why did we write the book? I guess I have two. I have sort of a macro and a micro, but why do we write the book? A lot of it is we have seen families go through the admission experience in a very healthy way, and as a result, have seen that it can be a lot like the college experience itself, right? It can be a time of discovery. It can be a time of relationship building. It can be a time of testing assumptions and maybe figuring out what you do and don't really, what you thought was true, but maybe what's a better path, right? I mean, that's what college is in general. And college admission can be that too. Unfortunately, too often, we can see where it drives what Brennan referenced earlier, these wedges, right, within families, within the kind of parent-child dynamic. And so the hardest part for me, I would say, on that kind of macro side is watching that play out and sort of bemoaning the fact that what could be a really unifying, what could be a really kind of exciting adventure turns into this sort of quote process, which everyone uses that word too much, this process that makes it feel like it's tight, and it makes it feel like it has to be done a certain way. And it makes it feel like if you go a little bit verging off, all of a sudden, you're doing it wrong, right? And so that's a lot of why we wrote the book. More recently, I would say, one of the hardest things for me at Georgia Tech is we've become more selective. We are not able to admit as high of a percentage of students as we used to be able to. That's not necessarily the trend per se in American higher education, but it is at Georgia Tech. And that is no fun, right? That is hard, not being able to admit more incredible students who want to be at this particular institution.
I was going to say, one of the things that I found so interesting and helpful in your book was talking about the statistics of how many colleges there are and how much the number of admissions has increased to a bunch of schools. And so it's sort of obviously the more people applying of that percentage, we still have, roughly the same number of slots every year. And so I think that's what helps build that anxiety and that fear is everything sounds so selective, but what people aren't considering is just how many people are applying.
Right.
Well, and at the same time, right, more colleges in this country take more students than they deny. Than the majority of colleges in this country take more students than they deny.
Right.
And so I would say the hardest part for me, kind of building off that, is seeing students tie themselves in knots over this experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like letting this kind of push to college rob them of adolescence. And so, students could do, especially at highly selective schools, students could do everything perfectly and still not get in, right? And so the hardest part for me is to see a student kind of manufacture this high school experience at the kind of at what cost, right? For striving for something that that might not come to fruition. We talk about this a lot about kind of authentically following the things you're excited about and letting that guide you to where you should be, rather than trying to force yourself into a kind of a square, a round peg in a square hole.
Mm-hmm.
So, Rick, I started to ask you this question, and as usual, took myself off in another direction. But I think, I want to bring us back to the funnel, because here we are talking about, right, that the range, what's the range of students applying. And one of the things that I have seen parents of students with disabilities say to each other is, well, if my kid didn't get into Georgia Tech, Hamblet University, it was because he disclosed his disability and that did it. And what always bothers me so much about that is it feels like it sort of blames the student for their rejection because they chose to disclose. And I don't think that that's something that anybody should assume. So could you talk about the funnel and kind of, illuminate for people how this all works, and that it isn't as simple as you said you had a disability?
Yeah. I mean, it really does go back to what I said earlier. I mean, that's just not what the conversation in the committee room circles around.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well, it's good to hear.
Yeah, no, and I'm happy to say it, you know, repeatedly, because if there was a camera in there, if there was a microphone in there and people saw and heard what was really being said, it does surround exactly what I said earlier. You know, number one, can the student do the work, right? I mean, can they be academically successful? Because you could create a beautiful campus in every other kind of check the box way, but if those students can't academically succeed, they're not going to be around. That's not going to be good for anybody, right? So can they do the work? Can they succeed academically? And then beyond that, you know, each school has their own mission, as Brennan was saying earlier. Like, each school exists for a reason. I think we forget that sometimes. Again, while college is a big word, we like to make it a small word and say they're all the same. They are, you know, they all just, college is college, and that's just not true. They all exist for a different purpose. And so, will this student help to enrich our community, and make the people that we're also bringing in, you know, think more, question themselves more, you know, stretch and push, to use that time together to collaborate, yes, but also to kind of change and improve. The conversation never goes to, you know, again, a punitive, the student has a disability, unless there's a question of how that's impacting them academically, and whether or not that, you know, is going to prohibit them from being successful.
And just to be specific, it wouldn't just be because the student said they had a learning disability or ADHD or on the autism spectrum, but you would be looking at their grades in the class.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right. So just for those
yeah.
just, again, it's
ability to be successful.
Yeah. And based on their grades in courses that are relevant to success at that
Absolutely. School. I mean, and that's why this whole test optional thing, you know, which I know would be a whole different show, but you know, the best predictor of college success is high school success, period. Inside and outside the classroom. Yeah. And particularly success later in high school, right? And this is why some schools are now not looking at the ninth grade at all, or they're calculating out the ninth grade GPA. I mean, because those later classes, the more rigorous classes, the classes that, you know, who you are as you're getting closer to going to college, you know, that's what's predictive. That's what we care about.
Brennan, I think some of these questions are probably good ones for you. So we have somebody who says she's got a very bright child with dyslexia who wants to pursue an engineering degree. She's currently in an engineering high school. I'm so old, I didn't know we had those, and loving it. Looking ahead at colleges, so many engineering schools are large, and this parent is worried that a large school might be too overwhelming for a student with dyslexia. Could you speak to the benefits of large versus small schools for students with learning disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not necessarily just about the size of the school. It's about kind of how it breaks down into different communities. So it might be, you know, it might be an engineering program within a large university, but within that engineering program, there's a lot of support in a closer, smaller community. And I would ask more about kind of what are the relationships like? What are the relationships with faculty like? What is the support like again at that school? So I don't think, I think it's a good question and a good one to be concerned about. But I think don't always, I think, and we talk about this in the book, but don't take things at face value, right? Don't look at the teacher to student ratio and say, wow, well, that must mean this, right? You need to dig into what is the, you know, what is the kind of background beyond the surface of that ratio? Like, do they have TAs? Do they have adjuncts? Like, really understanding all the information behind the data.
Rick, I was going to say, anything to add to that? I mean, you've worked in a couple of different kinds of schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think that's one thing for parents. I mean, as they're coaching their student through this, is they have invaluable perspective on how their son or daughter learns, the environments in which they thrive, the type of people that, bring out their best. And I think that, parents are always asking, or the sort of adults that are supporting students, around them are asking, like, what should be the appropriate role, right? How should I do this? How do I do this well?
Yeah.
And I do think, and that's a great question to be asking. It's a mature and perfect question to be asking. And I think that kind of coach type of perspective is great. And what coaches do, good coaches do, is they give perspective. They help to prepare and they give perspective. And I think and they ask good questions, or they kind of encourage in a certain direction. And I think that that's what parents, and the supporting adults around students should be doing. And so, I mean, I guess this is all to say, those buckets are easy to sort of like draw a line and say, big is over 10,000 and small is under 10,000. But that's really, that is really not accurate, as Brennan was saying, like digging into like, what's the culture of that place? And, based on what the student wants to study. I mean, if you come to Georgia Tech and you study mechanical engineering, your experience is going to be very different than if you come here and study physics, right? And, just the class sizes will be different. The student teacher ratio will be different. The experience in general will be different. And I think this is where people should, I like to say, like, draw circles, not lines, and I think that if they can kind of think more broadly instead of just like cutting, they're going to, and think again about their student, like what brings out their best is just a great way to approach it.
And Brennan, when you talk about, really getting to get those details, what do you suggest students ask the admissions office for a student they can talk to? In other words, I know that there are websites and all sorts of things they can do, but what's the best way for students to get that kind of experience about, can you really go talk to the professors and get more of that insider information?
Yeah, I mean, I would talk to as many people as you can, right? It's all about how many voices can you hear from when you're on a campus or after you're on a campus, and kind of triangulating what you hear, right? Like, is everything matching up, right? If you go over to the engineering department and talk to a professor there, are you hearing the same things that you're hearing from the admission office and from a student you might talk to and things like that? So I think getting that information, and yeah, I mean, the admission office is a great place to start, right? So even about class sizes, and again, we talk about this, but the average class size doesn't really tell you a lot.
And
right?
that's so interesting. Yeah.
It's different from, freshman year to senior year to, a 300 level class versus a 100 level class, how it breaks out, how they define class size at their institution. And colleges should be able to unpack that for you. And families should expect it.
Rick, I was going to say, do you, let me see if I can track back to that question. When we talk about class size, is it common for the size of freshman class, not the freshman class that's coming to your college, but the classes for those freshmen to be bigger than the smaller ones? How do families kind of work that piece out if they're larger in general until you move up the levels?
Yeah. No, I think it's exactly what Brennan said. I mean, to ask detailed questions that matter to you, and not just take what we give you. I mean, and again, all due respect to my admission colleagues around the country, but I mean, we have our little talking points, right? And we love to throw out ratios and rankings and simplify things, and not for nefarious purposes, but that's just sort of the way to get the broad information out quickly and succinctly. But, as a student and as a family trying to make that fit and match to a culture, I think what Brennan said is exactly right. And so the question is not, if someone like me says, and Georgia Tech's a good example, like our faculty student ratio is 19-1. So you hear that and you think, oh, sweet, I'm going to walk in on my first day to my English class and it's going to be me and 18 other kids sitting around a table. No. Like, you're going to go into a calculus class that's going to have 90 people in it, or a chemistry class that's going to have 150 people in it, because those are your kind of core general classes. And then as you move forward into, as he said, those kind of 3,000-4,000 level classes, particularly in certain subject areas. I mean, I've had physics majors who work for me that have 7 other people in their 4,000 level classes, and computer science students that have still as a 4,000 level class, 40 or 50 in their class. So I think if they can ask those detailed questions and again, ask as many people as possible. This is another mistake that families make, and students in particular. Like, they hear one tour guide say one thing they don't like, and all of a sudden that school is just not the place for them, even though there's 40,000 other people at that school, right? Yeah.
And maybe your tour guide's just having a bad day.
Yeah. Right. Or they don't have to be friends with that tour guide. They can find other people.
And actually, we did have a comment I thought, Rick, you might find interesting. Not a question, but a comment. Somebody suggests that schools recruit tour guides that actually use disability services and accommodations. The student perspective would be very helpful and bridge that gap. Truly, I believe your students' experience using accommodation services is based on individual professors working with kids. Okay. So for those who are just joining us, we are talking about The Truth About College Admissions with the authors, Brennan Barnard and Rick Clark. Let me see. My brain is on fire as usual. We're talking about class sizes, and I was thinking about, you made so many points, it's kind of hard to pick any of them. Did we ever actually explain the funnel? Did I keep interrupting you? I'm trying to remember. Actually, this is a good one. So test optional is a big thing right now. I'm not sure what that feedback is. Sorry. Right, test optional. It may or may not continue. It's big right now. Somebody's asked though, is it how important are they? And Brennan, you are somebody advising students about it, and I know you said some things in the book about whether or not to share them if it's optional.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is the question we hear all the time, right? Does optional really mean optional? And it does. And there are schools all over the country, especially now, and you see more and more extend their test optional policy every week. And if they are saying that they don't require test scores, then they legitimately mean it. They want you to share what put your best foot forward and share what your strengths are. And if that's testing, then unless you're applying to a school that's test free, like the UC system or something like that, then absolutely send them, right? And if it doesn't represent the best of you, and you feel like your grades and your other parts of your application speak more about your strengths, and it's a test optional school, then don't send them. And they're not going to read into that. They're not getting in your head. They're not
That's a great point, because I think sometimes families have said to me, well, if it's test optional and my kid doesn't send their scores, do they assume that they have a disability? I mean, Rick, you and I have talked about all the things that people just sort of worry about in their heads that don't really have any basis in fact.
Yeah, well, and now you're starting. This goes back to what Brennan was saying. I mean, about ask your questions, right? I mean, schools are getting better because this is more of a trend now to say, here's the percentage of students who applied with a test and without a test. And those percentages are balancing, right? I mean, in many cases, they skew more that are not submitting a test than those that do, and very well could continue in that direction. I would say, again, this goes back to, and Brennan said it, but like, do I want this to be part of kind of the story that I'm telling? I mean, is testing kind of one of my strengths? Is testing one of the things I want them to be evaluating? I have a choice in these test optional situations, right? But the truth is, like, you only take the SAT or the ACT the number of times you choose to take it, right? Nobody's making you take another ACT or SAT ever again in your life. Whereas they are making you write papers. They are asking you to use, let's say, calculus or physics or some other, subject you're actually computer science that you're actually taking in high school as a building block towards. And so, in this regard, I think that schools are realizing, hey, let's look at our data here. I mean, what is predictive of academic success? is it 4 hours on a Saturday, or is it 4 years in high school? And, of course, across the board, the answer is it's 4 years in high school. It's what you took, how you did, where you went to school, and whether or not you're prepared based on what we can see in your academic record.
And you talked about, there are schools, so there's the holistic review and then the just sort of, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the term for it.
Formulaic, yeah.
Formulaic, thank you. So for those schools, I would imagine those numbers are important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're having to adjust, right? I mean, the California state system has historically used a formula that includes really only 2 numbers, GPA and test scores. And now moving forward, it's going to not include the testing. That's going to be the path forward, right? And so focus on a student's academic success, academic preparation in the high schools is without a question, has been and will continue to be sort of the core of where admission folks start, regardless of whether it's a formulaic or holistic review process.
Okay. Oh, we have a question. My junior, who is dyslexic, is very interested in engineering. We're really drawing the engineering candidates for you today. I'm concerned about him taking both AP Calculus and AP Physics as a senior. Would he be at a big disadvantage only taking honors calculus? There's a sentence for me.
Right.
English major and physics. He is also going to be taking AP Computer Science.
I would just start by saying the biggest disadvantage he'll be at is if he overdoes it and kind of burns out, right? And so it's not going to help him to have taken AP Calculus and AP Physics if he's just kind of crushed by it. So I would start with that and let that kind of guide the way. But Rick, I'll let you kind of build on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the classic, admission answers is it depends. And I hate to throw it out here at this point. So late in the game, I almost made it through this whole time without using it. But there you go. I might need one of those, Brennan. But, it does depend on a lot of things. It depends on where they're applying, right? And I'm making this up. I just want to put a caveat here to say I'm making this up. Purdue may not care. Ask them the question, right, on whether or not they care about that choice. But, from one school to the next, the answer could and likely will vary based on who else is in their applicant pool and all of that. But I guess what I would just say, we're not looking at Georgia Tech. Okay. So I'll talk about Georgia Tech then in this case. Like for us with physics, if a student's applying for biomedical engineering or environmental engineering, that physics is not going to be as much of a preparation point as it would be for mechanical engineering or aerospace engineering. And so in a lot of cases, in a lot of schools, the way they're going to answer that question is, well, what type of engineering? What are you looking to study? I mean, we want you to have the best possible foundation when you come so you'll be successful. But I mean, this is just illustrative again of like college in America is a big word. And as a result, like the questions should be specific and the answers will vary. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So yeah, with WPI, URI, I don't know those answers, but ask them because, they will be very honest with you about what they're looking for, what they're looking at, what they're putting priority on.
And they're going to take it within the context of your high school, right? So they are going to look at how students are, kind of what the dynamic is there.
True. Yeah, good point.
Say that Brennan's business is called Mindful Admissions. And I think the mindful part is something that you both kind of bring to the book, to all the other work that you do. And Brennan, I think your point about, how's your kid going to feel taking these 3 AP classes? And, everybody handles things differently. But if they're really burned out senior year, just trying to, tick that box, is all of that worth it?
Yeah, if it impacts his grades and impacts, ability to do other things outside of class that might make him stand out, then, it's a balancing act.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the end of our hour. So I guess I'll just ask both of you if there's anything you want to leave the students with disabilities and their families, any kinds of thoughts or advice that we didn't cover yet.
I will leave it with an answer to Cecily's question. She's a hard hitter, because she asked if we would pick the same college for ourselves.
Oh yes, I saw that.
I mean, that just seems like a good one to end on. I
Right?
mean, so it's funny because a friend of mine who's a college counselor just randomly texted me last night and asked me, what are the 3 schools, knowing what I know now, I would have applied to when I was 18.
Oh wow.
I'm not going to tell you which schools they were.
Fair.
And he said, with the caveat that your academic, that you could have gotten into them, that your academics could have gotten you into. And it kind of plays this same question, right? Like, would I have gone to the same school as I did? Yeah, as my 18-year-old self, I probably would have. Looking back, are there better schools for me? Yeah, I could have gone to a dozen different schools and had an amazing experience and ended up in a similar place I am now, or maybe somewhere different. But I think that's just the point, right? It is a journey, right? And it's not. I think one of the dangers of this experience, whether you have learning disability or you have whatever, to see this as linear is really dangerous, right? This is like sometimes the students put so much pressure on them, like I need to go somewhere where I'm going to thrive for 4 years. I mean, that's the ideal, but like things change, right? I mean, if the pandemic is any indication of impermanence and adaptability, I think it's really important to understand that, like, it's going to work out, right? Like, as long as you have kind of a resilient and a growth mindset and approach this with kind of in a mindful way, I think you're gonna end up in the right place for you.
Yeah. To pick up on that and maybe close this out a little bit, I mean, the pandemic has taught us a lot. All of us as individuals, about our priorities, about the things we value. I think it's also, in a lot of ways, changed the admission process, but also the way that we produce information and content for students. It's a good thing. One thing that's taught me is, one of the things that does make people anxious is they feel like they're not in control, and all of us, whether it be related to this or other things, especially when it comes to our kids, right? As parents, I mean, that is difficult when we know that we're not in control. But what I've kind of realized is, like, students are way more in control and families are way more in control of this than they give themselves credit for. Because, I mean, we've just talked about it and talked about it in the book. We talked about it today. Like, 4,000 schools in America, more Americans going abroad than ever before. You have choices and options. And as parents, that's what we want for our kids. We want them we say we want them to be happy, be successful, but really we want them to be able to choose and have choices and options, right? And college gives you that, right? Lots of different places. Now, you don't necessarily control where you get in or how much money that school gives you to come there, right? So there is a portion that's outside of your control. But if you are doing your homework, asking good questions, really examining who you are and what you're trying to get out of it, you're going to have choices and options. You're going to get into a couple of places and you will be able to choose, right? So out of those 3 sections, 2 of them you control, where you apply and ultimately where you choose to go. But I think and Brennan just hit on it, and I just want to kind of close with this to say, every day we have a choice as to how we show up wherever we are. We get out of bed every morning wherever we are, and we choose how we're going to approach the day. And, I kind of believe, exactly what he said, which is you could toss kids on almost every campus or any campus in America. And if they have the right mentality, they can make friends, they can succeed academically, they can give themselves great, options when they graduate. I mean, I think that so much of it comes down to wherever they are, wherever they end up, like choosing day to day to embrace that opportunity and to make the most of it. And I think that, we see people every day in our own lives who have great opportunities. They're just not choosing to maximize, and others who are just taking every opportunity they have and thriving as a result.
Wow. It's good food for thought today. Thank you so much for everything. Just one last time, because you shouldn't miss this. Whoops, there we go. Oh, The Truth About College Admission is this gentleman's book. There is also a workbook to help your family work their way through this whole process. Follow them on social media. Brennan has a column with Forbes. Rick is on the Georgia Tech blog. He's on Twitter all the time saying really smart things. And really trying to help families, both of these gentlemen, just make it through this process, that I use the word process again, in a way that's good for everybody, results in a good match for the student. If you don't know who I am and why I'm the one running this conversation, I have a Facebook group for families of students with disabilities transitioning to college. My new book will be out in hopefully summer of 2022, and it's all about preparing your student for a transition to college. You will see Rick featured in that book as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And there's really good feedback happening. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Bye.
Elizabeth.
Bye.
Take care.